there are immense foundational and fundamental problems with the system that are killing this country. There's a lot of pontification and prognostication and Monday morning quarterbacking. Everyone's trying to figure out what in the world went wrong. Why did Trump win? How did he win again? How did he do it? What's going on? What's wrong with the Democratic Party? What's wrong with the country? And what's happening in America that this could happen? And I have a video here. I'm very glad I was able to find it. This is a video that was made about 12 years ago. And it's about wealth inequality in America. And guys, I'm not kidding when I tell you this video alone, this set of charts, this set of information explains exactly why we have the situation where someone like Donald Trump has so much appeal. So I want to watch it. Maybe we'll have some thoughts throughout, but I think this video is stunning. It's interesting, and it really explains everything. So without further ado, let us begin.
Chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around.
Just a reminder again, this is about 12 years ago. It's only been exacerbated since this point. So imagine that.
Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America.
Imagine 92% of the country agreeing on anything these days. Imagine Republicans and Democrats agreeing on a 92% issue.
America's wealth. But let's
I wonder if that would be a winning political issue.
move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Look at that. Look
Is
at the
not
chart
at
at the
all.
end there. That's stunning. Um, guys, look at that. It's not that I'm not going to come out and demonize anybody on one end of the spectrum or another. Um, but the reason that inflation was such the issue that it was, and that so many people cited that as their reason for voting for Trump, and cited the economy, inflation, prices, different versions of that. Inflation in this country over the 2 to 3 year period was only at about 9 or 10%. Um, where in other, tons of other countries have experienced, Russia experiences 10% inflation every single year, for example, right? There are other countries that deal with inflation to levels that we don't, we're privileged to not experience. So the 9 or 10% inflation um, was able to do the damage that it did because people are already squeezed so much that if you are in the bottom 60%, if you, which obviously the majority of people in this country, a little bit of inflation, a little bit of change in price is going to devastate you. You're already budgeting, you're already squeezing, you're already squeezed down. Medical expenses are extremely high. One emergency, one thing that sets you off and sets you back could blow up your whole bank account. So inflation touched people in this country in a way that it shouldn't have because we already put ourselves in such an abysmal position with how we've allowed billionaires to get away. And I'm going to do my Bernie Sanders. How we let the billionaires get away basically with murder in allowing them to walk out the back door with this much wealth. And the only person that has put that message out, and the only person that has made that clear, excuse me, this is not the one, the only person that's really fought for this um, in the last, like, what, 20, 30 years, like that's actually started a movement, is Bernie Sanders. And again, we're doing this, excuse me, excuse the ad there at the bottom. But I know this is retrospective and all that, but we could have had Bernie, and we could have potentially, who knows how he would have governed actually, but we could have potentially had revolutionary progressive, left-wing change in this country that actually, broke down the system, or at least that's what people that are voting for Trump are begging for and asking for. They're looking at that chart, these instances, these charts where, again, 92% of people have a vision of what an equitable society looks like, where you have enough competition, where there's something to look forward to. But, the if you were in a poor, born into poverty, or you just happen to fall on hard times, that you are not that far away from getting middle class. And if you're middle class, then you have enough wealth to really live a comfortable life. And then if you're middle class, if you want to go and aim for that luxury lifestyle, that you have that in front of you as well. And the society that we've actually built makes it so if you are poor, you are basically only going to be fighting to get poor for the rest of your life, or to be middle class poor. And then the middle class really don't have a lot of opportunity to get into that, uber mega rich category. It's like it's totally fucked up. So they'll tell you, oh, this is how the system is. This is the United States. This is how it is, baby. I don't think so. And I think it's painfully obvious at this point, where we're sort of running this gambit over and over again, where the only person that has mass appeal is this, outsider populist who says he's going to burn the whole system down. The problem is he actually going to solve this problem, right? And again, if this is the problem that's at the heart of the issue, then the last time he was in office, he didn't exactly address that by basically the only important piece of legislation that he passed was top 1% and corporate tax cuts that largely went to the top 1%. And the basically the rest of the country didn't get to experience those benefits as well. So I don't believe that Trump is the right guy to do it, because I think he's part of that club. I think he has benefited from those policies, and he had a chance to do it before and he didn't. So we'll see what he does this time, if he's going to change his tune. But obviously he's going to. I think he's surrounding himself with the same cadre of individuals as last time, and your Larry Kudlows and the like, that I don't think are going to let him get away with that. But we will have to see. Of course, again, that video was 10 years old and it looked like it did. This problem has only exacerbated itself over the last 10 years, and especially in the last several years since the pandemic. The pandemic exploded wealth inequality even more. So imagine that. Imagine a situation where we were already like this 10 years ago, and that it's only exploded and gotten worse. Again, this is why this is happening, right? And Kamala Harris was not able to break through because her plan, when you're only basically pushing for sort of around the corners, around the edges changes. Oh, I'm going to give you a tax credit here. I'm going to give you a down payment assistant there. You're missing the broader point that there are immense foundational and fundamental problems with the system that are basically killing this country. It is killing the middle class, it is killing the poor, and it is making it even more and more difficult to carve out a life in this country. Um, Finally, it's very frustrating for those people that, you're making $80,000 a year and you're still getting squeezed, right? You're making $100,000 a year, you're still not finding the money to pay the bills. That's how a lot of people feel. And when you hear all the time people from the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, you hear Joe Biden, coming from the president, the economy is stable, the economy is strong, the economy is growing, GDP is up, GDP is growing, per capita GDP. You hear them over and over again talking about, no, what are you talking about? Things are good, things are fine, things are strong, it's great. Average GDP per capita highest in the world, or one of the highest in the world. Look at us, 82,000 per person. We're all doing phenomenally well. But again, this is averages. These are averages, right? That means if you have 10 people that are making $800 million, and then you have like 1,000 people who are making freaking like $5,000, yeah, it's going to average out to 81,000. It doesn't mean that those people that are making $5,000 aren't making $5,000. They're still poor. They're still poor. The averages are just getting skewed because you have a few people making an absolutely monumental amount of money. That's how it works. So they're not fake numbers, they're real numbers. It's just not representative of what the average person is experiencing. Um, Completely skewed. Uh, so I think that pretty much covers it, man. So they're tired of hearing people talking about how everything is fine, how everything is great, and they're not experiencing that. And when you're living in a country that is the wealthiest country in the world, and you are poor and sick and hungry and dying and having all these problems financially, and the people that are telling you it's fine, of course you're going to get frustrated. Of course you're going to get, panicked and vote for the guy that sounds like he's going to be the solution, right? So that's a very interesting video there. I hope you got something out of it. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any other thoughts on that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe.